what the cause is, right? Something economical or social that has a base to it. Go back to Althusser's notion of base and superstructure. You have at one end the mode of production, which is capitalism, and then the superstructure, which is going to be the political, cultural, ideological aspect, and they plays upon each other, right? It's not just stagnant; it's in a dynamic contradiction.
Right.
Well, we've been trained.
Yeah.
Like we've been trained. Everything's been so particularized. We've been trained to be the star of our own stories.
Yes.
And that sedates us. That hijacks that drive for change and makes it.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring in a jargon term, but it goes in with, I just learned it. And I actually asked it in our group chat, Dave, yesterday. Lathouse or lathus, which is a term that's used in Seminar 17, but it's only used once and never brought up again. But it's like a way in which enjoyment is pretty much extended to not only just your symptom, but also how it could go into like an extension outside of your body. So for instance, he uses the recorder device like to record your voice. Like, oh, somebody could record this conversation right now, and then they could enjoy it later, pretty much. And so with that being said, you could see technology or like the way an algorithm is as a form of extension of enjoyment, in which now not only am I recording my enjoyment of like buying these things off of Amazon, but then the algorithm comes about and it's like, hey, you may like this. Oh, you're this, denomination, or you're this ethnicity or gender, identity. Maybe you'll like this. And so it creates this network of symptomal enjoyment that feeds into your ideology. So it's like, why would I want to revolutionize when I have all these choices at the palm of my hand? Right. It's like what was Nick's skit about the hot dogs? Like that sort of dude.
Splashinista.
Like, yeah, splashinista. Like that's exactly what you are. Like you end up becoming like this.
So we've subbed out our interpassive enjoyment to the algorithm, and we don't even have to think about anything at all. It's all handed to us on a plate.
Yes. And there goes our duty. Our duty is relinquished. Like we're relieved of our duty to enjoy because it's enjoyed for us. That's the whole point about the Big Other. And as we get into the first chapter, he talks about, in the beginning, the joke, the destiny of the joke, they mentioned that, with Christianity, you're forgiven for your ignorance because you have God, the Big Other. Psychoanalysis realizes that there is no Big Other, so you will not be forgiven for being ignorant and willfully enjoying your ignorance.
Yeah.
I'm gonna silence my mic real quick and my camera. I'm gonna turn it off.
Cool, man. Well, it's great having you, and this is a good point of. Let me address the audience. Hello, YouTube, as well as potentially podcast if this goes up on that side in the future. I'm David McCarricker. I'm the host here at Theory Underground. Theory Underground is a website, platform, and also potentially in the works, an app. I say potentially because there's just so many kinks getting it all set up, but it's coming together slowly but surely. On screen right now, it's Nance in the chat. That was Andrew, the Big Signorelli, a.k.a. Master Signified Bodies, a.k.a. Andrew Flores in the Navy. He was walking across base talking to us. And I started the stream in the middle of the conversation because I figured, it's either play a bunch of music while people realize there's a stream happening and start dropping in, or, just, air the great conversation we're already having. But bringing it back around, what we were just talking about was the importance of Dr. Adolf Reed Jr. as well as Norman Finkelstein, and how they are shunned by academia, by activists, by advocacy groups, by the nonprofit sector, and the Democrats, because obviously they are more or less class-based critics of these performativity, representational approaches to politics that tend to... how are you saying it, Nance? You were saying that basically, people want to feel... What you were saying, people want to feel something. People want to be able to go to brunch. People want to be able to do their nails. People want to be able to, you know,
We want Sarah McLachlan commercials that make us feel good. We don't want we don't even want to sit with the uncomfortable emotions that thinking about this brings up. We want the appearances of doing all the right things and holding all the right views, but we don't want to live up to those views.
Right.
Because it's uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, and I think for us, we probably get enjoyment from that discomfort, whereas other people, it's just straight up miserable. And so we're over here being like, come on, people, think critically. Don't just take Orange Man bad as confirmation bias. That means you don't have to think any harder, you know?
No,
Welcome
it's
back.
true though. And if we go back to understanding like someone like Christopher Lash, like, you know, this fits right in because the narcissism, which again, it in Lacanian terms is symptom, right? And with the Lathus, it's the same thing of extending your own enjoyment as a circuit that just comes back to justifying what your identity is. Well, it's not this self-interested, oh, I know what I enjoy, like I'm living this good like solipsistic life. No, it's painful. It's jouissance, enjoyment is not a good thing. It is insatiable and it's hard to maintain, and that's why it's discomforting and it's miserable. So that's why we go out and project ourselves out into the world to try to map our cognitively map, to use Frederick Jameson terms, but also to map our enjoyment so that we could be something for the other.
Hey, you two, entertain, keep the conversation going and entertain the chat while I go get my coffee, and then I'll get to reading the beginning of For They Don't Know What They Do, chapter 1. All right?
For sure. Yeah. But no, like definitely that makes sense. Like, Nat's like, yeah, at the end of the day, people want to go and watch Netflix or HBO Max or go have brunch. And there, what's the thing that's oh, if you're feeling stressed, therapy shopping helps, you know, therapy spending, go out and treat yourself, go bar hopping. Like, what else is better to do than that? Like,
What?
You're just a regular like working class person.
And
but even like the middle class too, it's just like, oh, let's go to Cancun, you know.
yeah, and like the self-care thing, like we had talked about before, like I come from a CBT background, and like self-care is important to a degree, but self-care is not the end goal. Like,
Right.
self-care is some maintenance so you can get back to this shit that is actually uncomfortable, and you can fully engage with it rather than brain off all the time, brain off sometimes, so big brain sometimes.
Yes, and like you said, like we used to work with CBT, and the main thing that it, like anything like CBT or DBT can do is help you in a crisis. And the thing is like these are things to only help in extreme measures and not like a code or tool, like a code of ethics or tools to live by. Because at the end of the day, it's these things are like certified gaslighting, but also water wash ways of thinking, right? They've taken stoicism and Socratic thinking to just get to the bottom of like, these are my triggers, instead of talking about like, what are the conditions of possibility that are making me like this person that desires this, or, you know, what is truth? What is causing the conditions politically and socially, you know, and how am I a part of it? How am I affected by it, and how do I affect it now, right? Because with CBT, right, for being behaviorism, like it's like one of the things is, oh, your behavior could be shifted and shaped by the environment, but as soon as the environment is, you know, talked about in forms of systemic oppression or capitalism or ideology, oh no, that's like a automatic cognitive distortion.
Yeah,
that,
you have a thinking error.
Yeah, you
And
have a thinking error.
The thing that I couldn't do it anymore was when I realized all of this is just fixing us enough so we can get back to work. Like in the DSM, a disorder, it disrupts you from being able to work and be productive, and that's it. There's nothing beyond work. Work, work,
Right.
work, work, work. You're not a human. You're a tool. You're a machine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then like there I've been to a handful of group CBT based counseling sessions like in the military, and then I'm going through a DBT one, and like people always complain about like their chain of command. It's just like, well, how do you think they would feel about the situation? Do you really think that they're abusing their power or not caring about the sailors? What if you're just thinking of it one-sided and you have to think about what you could control the situation? How could you intervene? And just all this stuff that mystifies the over the fact that no, there is like hierarchical oppression, right?
It's like we're all in the 100-acre wood and we're all
Yeah, you're
just toys and
you're
there's nothing beyond.
you got to realize that your boss, your leader, is also human too, so you have to take that in consideration. That's the other thing, which is like what Žižek talks about, like of like the what he calls it, like the postmodern boss versus the authoritarian. It's like the authoritarian, you're like they're up in front. It's like, oh, do what the fuck you're told. You're nothing but a worker. I'm the boss. Right there, you know where the enemy's at. But you don't know when you have this, neoliberal boss that's like, "Hey, friend, how y'all doing today? Does everybody have their coffee? How was your weekend? Did you have a good fuck?" Like type thing. Like, I'm your best friend, hugging and everything. Like we care.
I'm gonna
We're a
make you
family.
want to do this rather than tell you
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
this.
yeah. You need to think positively, man. Like have your goals. We're having meetings so we can think of like ways to be goal oriented, have a work mindset, a group synergy. Like, no.
Reverse fulfillment in the chat said CBT may overemphasize individual responsibility for mental health rather than considering broader societal factors. That sounds like
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
yeah, that's what you're all saying, yeah. And I would say that
Absolutely.
when I hear someone like Stutz or uh, even someone like Peterson, and they're talking about some basic CBT principles, I know it's something that it's easy to make fun of because it's like, as Nick said, anybody can find these kinds of tips on a Reddit page. The thing is, it takes a charismatic person that you can develop some kind of an ego identification with saying it for it to click usually, because we're not all autistic. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, we're not all,
Right.
most people on Reddit are, but most of us require that ego identification thing.
Right. And Peterson's one of those ambiguous characters, no matter how much people want to shit on him. But like he's not really working, like at some points he works in this like personal self-help, self-care, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but then he's like also simultaneously talking about philosophy and then like the unconscious and like hidden motives and drives that like we gotta be wary of. So it's like there's the idiosyncrasy in his ideology. That's one thing that makes him different from like a Stutz bro, and
Right,
why
right,
he's
right,
so
right, right, right,
appealing,
right, 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 right,
because
right.
he does bring about like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, all these thinkers
Well,
that do have
and
influence in psychoanalysis.
like with Slavoj, he also, if you're new to all this stuff, you go, oh, he's brave because he's willing to speak out on things that everyone else just shuts their brains off and says the dumb shit that here's the problem though. Peterson ends up shutting his own brain off and saying the dumb shit people say. He just does it from the other side. But speaking of, I'm about to transition here to showing the or to reading. Yeah, we're going to do an exegetical reading. So folks who are joining, a lot of times these exegetical reading sessions are private, but I wanted to do this one live because, well, here's the problem. I'm running out of space on my computer, and the way I was doing it when I do these privately, then I have to do a bunch of editing afterwards. And there was an approach that made it so I didn't have to do very much editing, but even then, it's become this backlog of shit I have to do. And so I have all this stuff I have to do, but then I still told people like 2 days ago, okay, you've got 2 weeks to read chapter 1 for They Know Not What They Do before the next lecture. Do it sooner than later because otherwise you'll never get to it. And then I was like, I'll try to do it tomorrow. And then yesterday I was so overwhelmed, I ended up not getting to it. So I thought, I'm still overwhelmed today, but at a bare minimum, if I can at least read a section of this text, I will have accomplished something, and then I can go do other things. But I'm gonna show the meme that I posted this morning, because it's about Slavoj, so I've been watching Devs. Anybody else familiar with Nance knows what it's about. Yeah, that's where it's at. So here's the Devs meme. Let's turn the volume on. Let's see. Is there a way I could start it over? Here we go.
Come on, baby.
Don't do that.
What do you do?
Called it baby.
Oh, well, he can't help it. He's the era that doesn't know.
Say what?
You're the era that doesn't know. The one that says stupid shit and gets stuff wrong.
You're the fucking era that doesn't know. Your era doesn't know shit. Also fucking political. Also woke. But you don't know shit about history, you don't know shit about art, you don't know shit about music. So you don't know shit about politics. So you aren't woke. You're comatose.
I don't know shit about music. Please.
Listen to a lot of Bach, a lot of Coltrane.
No.
Then shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up. And the format for that was what actually happened to make Slavoj Žižek say, the woke awaken us to racism and sexism precisely to enable us to go on sleeping. So, it's just a quote from the controversial article that came out like last week. Arguably controversial. Only really controversial if your core constituency are the brunch liberals that we were talking about at the beginning of this stream. Yeah. And then there's a handful of people who are like, that's not my core constituency. I'm radical. And it's like, yeah, but all your scripts are downloaded from a server that was put together by the CIA thinking about the brunch liberals as its core constituency. So good luck, have fun. Like, it's like Vosh. Vosh is the angry brunch liberal. Like, he's like the brunch liberal who will say retarded. Ooh, edgy, bro, edgy. Anyway, all right, we're about to get to it. Chapter 1, and that's funny because it's like it's dirtbag leftist is an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic. It's not a real position for anything. It's just an aesthetic. So let's get to it though. And if anybody's like, well, why you gotta punch on Vosh? The stream about that is yesterday. Today, we're doing real theory stuff. So, For They Know Not What They Do is the book that I'm holding right here in my hand. The first lecture in the series for the course on this text at Theory Underground occurred a couple days ago, and Saturday night. It was pretty cool. I don't know. Do you guys think it was pretty cool? I know you're both still there. Andrew might not be able to unmic, but I don't know. How are you feeling after that lecture? Andrew in the chat said it was rad.
Dude, it was amazing. Like my brain is still in overdrive. It was fucking amazing.
Yeah, it was one of the coolest things I've experienced, and so I'm pretty stoked about the rest of this. And it's funny because it's like I've done like streams with Mikey where he's speaking to a public, but I think putting it together as a proper course, putting together a proper syllabus, charging people money, those were the things that made Mikey have to prepare himself in a way that he does not normally prepare himself. And so, all of the shit we've ever done together is good or even excellent. But this was on another level, and it's because of the psychological preparation that goes into the anticipation of the event when the event is scheduled out ahead of time. It was sick. And so it's not one of those things like where you snooze, you lose, you'll never get to be a part of it. This is the first part of a series this lecture that he gave, is the first part of a series for a course that is going to remain available on the website, and the website will hopefully have an app version soon. And so what I'm hoping is that as time goes on, this course will become a sort of rite of passage. As Žižek says, if you haven't read For They Know Not What They Do, then keep my sublime object out of your fucking mouth. Direct quote. Adam says, I'll bring more beer next time. Hell yeah. All right. This is the point that somebody in the very near future, or even right now, should timestamp in the comment section of the video, because there will be people who are doing the For They Know Not What They Do course now or in the future who do not have the time and or energy to do the reading on their own. The goal of this exegetical reading is to not just read it off like an audiobook. If I was reading it off like an audiobook, there would be copyright issues. But there's nothing wrong with reading something and then talking about it as you go. And I mean, that is the original way of reading before the Gutenberg printing press revolution and people reading in isolation and solitude. The tendency was that the priest class and the elite of the aristocracy were able to sit there with people who'd spent their life reading certain texts, and then those people would read them aloud and commentate on them. And your job was to transcribe, which is to say, like, directly write down everything being said to create another edition of the text, but also like the commentary gets added to a separate document that's called the secondary text. Primary text, secondary text. And now people feel so stressed out because they think they have to do all the reading on their own, inside of their own heads, instead of out loud. They think that there's this big pressure, this big rush to get it over with as quick as possible so they can get on to the next book. And so in a way, Theory Underground is revolutionizing how we think about reading in the 21st century. In the era of streaming, it only makes sense to make this kind of content available. But for working class people or ADHD autodidacts or anybody who likes to multitask, like gamers who like to listen to things while they game, the point is to make these readings accessible so that in the hypothetical future that you're taking the For They Know Not What They Do class, in preparation for the lectures, if you really can't turn pages, then you can just listen to me read it. And I will talk a little bit as we go, but no promises that I really understand what's going on here. I'm scared to say, like, I'm scared to do this in a sort of sense, because this is real theory. I'm going to put my foot in my mouth inevitably, but whatever, fuck it. I'm going to go for it anyway. We don't grow if we don't fail. Let's get to it. Chapter 1, On the One. And I'll check in on the chat every once in a while. The birth of a master signifier. The non-analyzable Slovene. Let us begin with our place of enunciation, Slovenia. This is from a live lecture that he gave back in the 1989 or 1992 or something like that. Let us begin with our place of enunciation, Slovenia. What does it mean, psychoanalytically speaking, to be a Slovene? There is only one mention of a Slovene in Freud's entire opus, and that is in a letter to the Trieste psychoanalyst Eduardo Weiss on the 28th of May, 1922. However, this one mention is itself more than enough, since it condenses within it a whole series of key questions of psychoanalytic theory and practice, from the ambiguity of the superego to the problem of the mother as the bearer of the law/prohibition in Slovene tradition. So it's worth taking a closer look at it. Weiss, who practiced psychoanalysis in the 20s, he emigrated to America in the 30s when political conditions in Italy made his practice impossible, corresponded regularly with Freud. Their correspondence revolved mainly on Weiss's cases. Weiss reported to Freud on the course of analysis and asked him for his advice. So he appealed for Freud's view on two patients at the beginning of the 20s who both suffered from the same symptom, impotence. Let us look at Weiss's own presentation of the two cases. Quote, I have been treating two patients in 1922 who both suffer from impotence. The first is a highly cultured man, around 40 years old, so some 10 years older than I. His wife, whom he loved very much, had died a few years earlier. He experienced full sexual vigor during the time of the marriage. The wife fell into a heavy depression. Attempts to cure her by some Viennese analyst provided no results at all. She committed suicide. My patient reacted to the suicide with heavy melancholy. The second patient, a Slovene, was a young man. He had served in the army in the First World War and had only shortly prior to this been demobilized. In the sexual field, he was completely impotent. A number of people had fallen prey to his deception, and he had a thoroughly immoral ego. Okay, so two people are sexually impotent. One is older, one is younger. One is not Slovene, the other one is Slovene. Okay? What strikes the eye in this presentation is the almost total symmetry of the two cases. The first patient is 10 years older than Weiss, the second some 10 years younger. The first is a highly cultured and moral man, the second extremely immoral. And in both cases, we are dealing with the same effect, impotence. Strictly speaking, the symmetry is not complete. The Italian was capable of occasional sexual contact with prostitutes. To a man of high culture and mores, this does not, of course, count as real sexual contact with an equal, while the Slovene was completely impotent. I always learn weird-ass shit about people from this period and their opinions or like understanding of fidelity, infidelity, loyalty, cheating, etc. And you hear a lot of it. Žižek likes to relay it because I think it offends people's sensibilities a little bit, while getting at something that a lot of people take to be true. Freud's answer in the letter of the 28th of May, 1922, took up this duality. He opined that the Italian warranted further treatment since one was dealing with a man of high culture and mores. In his case, it was simply exaggerated remorse. His impotence was the result of a pathological guilt complex. The solution for him, a man of refined sensitivity, was accepted of his wife's suicide. The solution for him was acceptance of his wife's suicide. About the Slovene, Freud remarked, the second case, the Slovene, is obviously a good-for-nothing who does not warrant your efforts. Our analytical art fails when faced with such people. Our perspicacity alone cannot break through to the dynamic relation which controls them. It is not difficult to detect a basic deadlock in Freud's answer. It shows primarily in the contradictory nature of it, his oscillation between two positions. He first presents the Slovene as someone unworthy of psychoanalytic care, with the implication that it is a simple case of a direct, superficial evil, immorality, without any kind of depth that pertains to our unconscious psychic dynamic. Then in the following sentence, his case is contrarily defined as such that it cannot be analyzed. The barrier here is thus not ethical, unworthy of analysis, but of an epistemological nature. It is in itself non-analyzable. An analytic attempt at it fails. The paradox with which we are dealing here corresponds precisely to the logical paradox of the prohibition of incest. What is prohibited is something already in itself impossible, and the enigmatic character of the prohibition of incest is precisely in this redundancy. If something is in itself impossible, why is it necessary further to forbid it? Wherein consists then the paradox of the Slovene's impotence? Nothing is easier than to explain this impotence as a result of excessive obedience, remorse, as a result of a feeling of guilt resulting from excessive discipline and rigid moral sensitivity, and so on. This is the habitual everyday concept of psychoanalysis. Against the excessive discipline of superego, this agency of internalized social repression, it is necessary to reaffirm the subject's capacity for relaxed fruition. It is necessary for the subject to free the internal inhibition which blocks his access to enjoyment. Okay, couple things about this. So really, yeah, he's just elaborating on the difference between these two, the Slovene and the Italian. But the funny thing, obviously, is that Freud has a kind of, it seems, probably sort of racist opinion of Slovene people, saying, our perspicacity alone cannot break through to the dynamic relation which controls them, right? And so here we have someone who's one of the the chief defenders of psychoanalysis is a Slovene, right? So he's making sense of our position of enunciation, right? The subject of enunciation, to use the jargon that was unpacked in lecture 1 of this course, is not just the place of Slovenia, where they are when the lecture is occurring, but also it's just the fact that Žižek himself, the filthy Slovene, is the one who's contextualizing himself in this discourse, using the one time in Freud's entire corpus that he talks about a Slovene. And yeah. So the paradox of the Slovene's impotence. Now, the Slovene is this filthy, immoral, fuckboy. And this fuckboy's been really just, he's not raising himself to any higher level. He's just running around trying to bang anything that walks, it seems like. But at the same time, he's become sexually impotent, right? And so what is the solution to this? The idea would be that against the excessive discipline of superego, the agency of internalized social repression, it is necessary to reaffirm the subject's capacity for relaxed fruition. Okay, I don't know what the hell that means. Anybody have ideas, let me know. It is necessary for the subject to free the internal inhibition which blocks his access to enjoyment. Obviously, if you're running around being immoral by your society's standards, whatever those standards might be, even if you disagree with those standards at the level of your conscious ego and you say, I'm a rebel, I don't care about these standards, your unconscious still could care about these standards, and there could become a sort of deadlock in your libidinal economy that blocks off access to your enjoyment, this form of inherent transgression of being a fuckboy, due to some kind of a guilt complex, right? Freud's Slovene exhibits clearly the insufficiency of such a logic of freeing desire from the restraint of internal repression. He is, in Weiss's words, very immoral. He exploits his neighbors and deceives with no kind of moral scruple. Yet, in all this, he is far from able to achieve relaxed fruition in sex. So I guess relaxed fruition would just be like what? Just like what? Like good sex, I guess? Or what does that mean? Like climax?
It would pretty much mean pretty much achieving the pleasure principle, like homeostasis, right? On a conscious level, because unconsciously he can't, or even consciously he can't, probably.
Yeah, I think you're right. Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. I love having disembodied voices of my homies, like ready to hand while I'm reading. This it's so cool. This is fun. And Tyler Murphy said Dave isn't afraid to put his foot in his mouth. No, the only way, it's my Fichtean anstos, right? My ability to say anything worth hearing is also at the same time my being okay with constantly putting my foot in my mouth, right? Okay. Yet in all of this, he is far from able to achieve relaxed fruition in sex without any kind of internal obstruction. He is completely impotent. Enjoyment is entirely forbidden to him. Or in the words of Lacan against Dostoevsky, against his famous position, if there is no God, all is permitted. If there is no God, the name of the Father, as an instance of the law/prohibition, everything is forbidden. And is it too much to suggest that this is precisely the logic of totalitarian political discourse? This is, by the way, halfway through this paragraph. It seems like a point to bring up a new paragraph, doesn't it? But it's like the hinge point, and this is where he's about to take things to another level, right? So I will reread the last couple sentences, thinking about, okay, there's a hinge point in this paragraph where he's going to take it to another level, okay? So in the words of Lacan against Dostoevsky, against his famous position, if there is no God, all is permitted, it's a reversal. If there is no God, the name of the Father, as an instance of the law, prohibition, everything is forbidden, right? So if there is no God, everything's forbidden. The complete opposite of the quote that gets attributed to Dostoevsky. And is it too much to suggest that this is precisely the logic of totalitarian political discourse? The impediment of the subject produced by this discourse results from a similar absence, suspension, of the law/prohibition. However, to return to our Slovene, on the basis of the fact that it was only Lacan who elaborated this logical paradox of impediment, of universalized prohibition, brought about by the very absence of the law/prohibition, we could venture some wild speculation and say that we Slovenes, unanalyzable according to Freud, had to wait for Lacan to find a meeting with psychoanalysis. Only with Lacan did psychoanalysis itself achieve a level of sophistication on which it is capable of tackling such foul apparitions as the Slovenes. So, he's writing at a time when totalitarianism is busting apart, right? It's, and obviously this is a term, totalitarianism, that he later problematizes because people will say that it conflates the crimes of the Nazis with the crimes of the communists and that these are not things that can be equated. Obviously, what is meant by totalitarianism, though, is the centralization of all powers, all production, and really anything that you can or are able to do with your time and energy under under some centralized governmental military organ. And then the more totalitarian aspect is that, even what you believe, even what you think is being controlled, right? And so everyone, that creates this gap between what people say and what people really think. You live in a society of doublespeak, right? And the point is that with the death of God, it's not that everything becomes permissible. It's actually the exact opposite. It's that everything becomes prohibited, right? And a good example of that, obviously, is people who they cannot think about steak. They cannot think about qualitative differences. They cannot think about, and when I say steak, I mean steaks. Not like you eat steak, but like fuck, actually, I use this term so often and I never really define it. But steaks, like it actually matters, right?
Vested interest.
Yeah, a vested interest. Or think of the way that like a movie without stakes is where you're not really worried anything bad's gonna happen, right? A movie without stakes might even have people that die or could die, but you're not worried about them because they've not realistically established the characters. So like really corny horror movies are a good example of movies without stakes, because like they don't develop the characters and everything's predictable, and in fact you're probably making fun of the characters, so there's not really stakes. It's, you know, it's more of just like a slasher. And so the point is like thinking stakes and thinking about degrees and thinking about, you know, qualitative differences. That's the stuff that kind of gets washed away nowadays, and that's why you have people getting upset because somebody used the word dumb or lame or stupid. Oh, you know, it's all this focus on language, and like maybe if we could just, you know, cleanse language, then we would be able to make the representational kind of changes that we want, you know. But obviously what goes missing is that this is a great way for people to feel morally superior at brunch or on stream, while the world continues to burn. Child slavery is still a thing, right? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, what is at stake is like saying what is at risk, right? And to say that people are not thinking stakes is to like say people aren't really thinking like, okay, yeah, potentially somebody could be offended by this term, but also that person would be such an extreme minority of people, and then they would have to be so hypersensitive already that to give them an inch would be to give them a mile. Like you can't satisfy everybody, right? So anyway, the point being, with the death of God, it's not that everything's permitted now. It's in fact, and this is the point with that article that Slavoj just put out about wokeism. The point is that everything's prohibited. But at the same time, it doesn't wake us up to the reality of the situation. In a sort of sense, it allows us to go right on sleeping. So how do we account for this paradox that the absence of law universalizes prohibition? There is only one possible explanation. Enjoyment itself, which we experience as transgression, is in its innermost status something imposed, ordered. When we enjoy, we never do it spontaneously. We always follow a certain injunction. The psychoanalytic name for this obscene injunction, for this obscene call, enjoy, is superego. The paradox of the superego is staged in its pure form in Monty Python's Meaning of Life, in the episode about sexual education. Bored schoolboys yawn in the classroom, awaiting their teacher's arrival. When one of them shouts, "He's coming!" all of a sudden they start to make a noise, shout, and throw things at each other. The entire spectacle of wild uproar is here exclusively to impress the teacher's gaze. After quieting them, the teacher begins to examine them on how to arouse the vagina. Caught in their ignorance, the embarrassed pupils avoid his gaze and stammer half-articulated answers, while the teacher reprimands them severely for not practicing this subject at home. With his wife's assistance, he thereupon demonstrates to them the penetration of penis into vagina. Bored by the subject, one of the schoolboys casts a furtive glance through the window, and the teacher asks him sarcastically, "Would you be kind enough to tell us what is so attractive out there in the courtyard?" Things are here brought to an extreme. The reason this inverted presentation of the normal, everyday relationship between law, authority, and pleasure produces such an uncanny effect. The reason it produces such an uncanny effect is, of course, that it exhibits in broad daylight the usually concealed truth about the normal state of things, where enjoyment is situated by a severe superego imperative. It's important to remember, and this might be a question for Mikey, but Slavoj is not using superego and law, authority, to speak of the same thing. Obviously, that is how Freud talks about it. It is in Lacan, though, that there becomes this distinction between the big other, the social authority, the law, and on the other side, the superego. The point about the superego in Žižekian theory of ideology is that the superego commands you to enjoy. Okay, but as Marilyn asked in the forum on Theory Underground this week, on the public side, actually. So I'm going to actually show this because it's a fantastic way to tie in the forum. So if you go to theory-underground.com/forums, you'll find this page. And you won't see all of these if you're not registered, right? You actually have to register with the site and all that. But the public/open forums, you don't have to be in a class to take that. And so if you click on that, you see Marilyn asked a question, what kind of enjoyment are we talking about? And she's tying it in directly to this issue of the superegoic imperative to enjoy. She says, I just finished going through the Lacan and Žižek 101 YouTube lectures, and I'm left with a question. I was going to ask in the For They Know Not What They Do forum, but others here might have the same question or answers. When the superego has this imperative to enjoy, are we talking about jouissance, pleasure, or some combination of both? Because if you remember, the two should be thought about as opposites to break yourself of the habit of conflating them. I'm trying to think of ways this differs in function from the big other and coming up short in separating them. If the big other is setting out a certain lifestyle that one should participate in, isn't there also inherited from that the things one is supposed to take pleasure in? Pilates, certain fad foods, etc. And Adam has a great response, but it's long, and Marilyn has a great response, but it's long, and I'm not going to be able to respond to both of these, but I did read them earlier, and I will sit here and I'll push the like button on both of them. But we're going to get straight to Mikey's answer. Now, she says, my answer to the superego was answered in the latest video installment on the Žižek series, part 18. So season 2, episode 18 of the Me and Mikey Conversations deals with this, and she says it's definitely jouissance. But I do want to actually read what Mikey wrote here. Marilyn, for Lacanians, Žižekians, the superegos enjoy commands us to have jouissance. Todd McGowan is helpful on understanding the difference between superego and the big other. Oh, wonderful. A good quote. It goes, this law is embodied in the name of the Father, the name that symbolizes, in Freud's myth, the murdered primal father. The name of the Father, according to Lacan, founds the fact that there is law. It is, in the interior of the other, an essential signifier. This name, or primordial signifier, and by the way, obviously that would be like the king or God, but in today's world, that would also mean Trump or some figure that you put in that position of the one who can make sense of everything and speak out on things. But because we live in a sort of anti-authoritarian world, there are other stand-ins or there are other ways of articulating or thinking of this that try to fill in that gap or that void. And for most people on the left, the name of the Father would probably just actually be the left or the revolution. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if Mikey will agree with that interpretation, but I think that is correct. The point is that the name of the Father and the master signifier are almost the same thing. They're kind of different ways of saying the same thing. The name of the Father has its root, though, in the fact that in a feudal society, or in really almost any traditional society, especially any patriarchal society, you don't have your own name so much as your father's name. I mean, we still do this with last names, right? My last name is McCarricker. That was my father's name. That was his father's name, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, nobody takes that seriously nowadays. The point is the last name that you had back then defined all of your world's possibilities and how people made sense of you. Oh, you're the son of the blacksmith, so you're going to be a blacksmith, and that's your possibilities. Oh, you're the son of the feudal lord, so you're going to be a feudal lord, so that's your possibilities, right? So that's why Lacan uses this as a way of talking about the master signifier in some cases. Andrew says, for Trump, he wouldn't be the big other in my understanding, but what he represents, MAGA. Trump would stand in for the big other. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm definitely not saying that, but is the name of the Father and the big other the same thing? Are you saying that they're the exact same thing? That Mikey's working on a post that really works out the difference between quilting point, master signifier, name of Father, and their relations to the big other and their relations to the superego, and like really clarifying these differences that Lacanians tend to kind of gloss over. Anyway, back to this McGowan quote. So yeah, anyway, it is in the name of the Father is in the interior of the other, an essential signifier. This name, or primordial signifier, indicates the absence of the unrestrained enjoyment of the primal Father, and it serves to bar anyone entering the symbolic order from enjoyment. On the basis of this evacuation of enjoyment, the symbolic order constitutes itself and thus demands that subjects seek recognition through the law in lieu of enjoyment outside of it. The law itself, however, is not entirely free from enjoyment. Enjoyment lives on in the law in the form of the superego, which is, of course, the law insofar as the subject has internalized it, right? Because the law can exist and you haven't internalized it, but the superego is the internalized version of that. Whereas the law proper, as the name of the Father, marks the absence or death of the primal Father and his horrific enjoyment, the superego, the internal representation of the law, is the remnant of this Father that continues to make its presence felt. Overflowing with the primal Father's enjoyment, the superego, as the underside of the law, makes evident the obscenity in the law itself. The obscene superego represents the limit of the society of prohibition. It is the point at which enjoyment infects the prohibition itself. Thus, it should not be at all surprising that it is around the figure of the superego that we can witness the emergence of the society of enjoyment. And what we see here is an example of a bunch of code being, God damn it. See, this is an issue, one of the many technical issues that I've been dealing with for a while now, is that sometimes when people post in the forum, there's a bunch of random code. The code is not supposed to be there. It's not supposed to be like that. And so I've opened so many support tickets in the last 2 months. And this is one of the ones that we've been working on. So hopefully that'll be solved soon. But basically, you know, insofar as you internalize the law's prohibitions, which is to say, like, you grow up. Now, the most traditional cliche example is daddy's telling you no. Daddy tells you no. Don't do that. Don't do this. But obviously, you could have two lesbian moms, and the same dynamic would exist. You would ultimately, they both still tell you no. One of them probably tells you no more often than the other one. And so that how you learn to navigate the no, how you internalize that, teaches you ways of getting partial enjoyment. And that partial enjoyment, that partial jouissance, is always had in a sort of sense because you have like this unconscious urge to get what you felt was taken away from you through prohibition, through castration, right? Andrew said, yeah, I think the name of the Father and the big other are one. Okay, cool, good to know. We'll keep this as a sort of question for Mikey. And for the time being, I'll assume you know what you're talking about, Andrew, because I definitely know. I don't know. And then Dan says, is the big other our personalized version of the name of the Father? No. The superego is our personalized. Yeah. You got it. Okay. And then I'm going to check in on the chat because there's a bump in chat over here. It's good to see you all, everybody. Everyone's having a great time, it looks like. So Reverse Fulfillment says, I appreciate you doing this, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, Reverse Fulfillment. Tyler Murphy says, love the stuff on logical time and the lack of the real in early Lacan's conception of it. And Adam Mad echoed that. And in the private chat on the Zoom side, Andrew had actually said the same thing, that he really loved Mikey's talk on logical time, which, by the way, for anybody who's wondering about that, that's lecture 1 of For They Know Not What They Do course on Theory Underground. And it's probably like the last hour and a half of that lecture when Mikey goes into Lacan's conception of logical time and how that other author who has a Chinese name I have not learned yet, or whose name is Chinese and I haven't learned it yet because I haven't read his book yet. But basically, he wrote a book on logical time and talking about applying, thinking Lacan's logical time from the position of his later work. Secret Agent Dan says, in this case, I think it's also highly important. There is not a physical dysfunction. It's a psychological dysfunction that requires the perception of a peer/equal. Adam Matt says, emoji above, licking feet. Oh, I don't know what that's about. Tyler Murphy, Dave isn't afraid to put his foot in his mouth. No, I'm not. Oh, the emojis above were about putting the foot in your mouth. Okay. Does any Tyler Murphy sort of saying, if anyone should have a reason not to take seriously Freud, it should be us Slavines? Right. And at the same time, us Slavines can only really be analyzed or made relevant or see Freud as relevant through Lacan. Tyler Murphy says, I think the big other is necessary, functions like a parent who lays down the law, calls forth their child into language, but the parent doesn't need to necessarily command the child to enjoy. Yeah, no, it never, as long as you've got social authorities telling you don't do this, don't do that, however you figure out how to navigate the obstacle course of prohibitions that are being put on you by these social authorities will be the way your libidinal economy finds its ways to get its partial jouissance. Secret Agent Dan says, Reese Levine's, it took Lacan to unblock the enjoyment of psychoanalysis so that it could analyze the Slavine. Yes. Okay, bringing it all back around now to the text. I will reread where we were. Things are here brought to extreme. The reason this inverted presentation of the normal everyday relationship between law, authority, and pleasure produces such an uncanny effect is, of course, that it exhibits in broad daylight the usually concealed truth about the normal state of things where enjoyment is sustained by a severe superego imperative. I would just add that superego imperative to enjoy is usually to find a way to inherently transgress. Inherent transgression are those acts of rebellion or drama mongering that don't actually challenge the law in any real way, right? It's the performative protest that actually gives power to, or it actually, by challenging the authority, sort of reifies that authority, right? It's already contained. It's already prefigured into the entire, it's a ceremony, right? The crucial theoretical point not to be missed here is that such mirror inversion cannot be reduced to the domain of the imaginary. That is to say, when one deals with the opposition of the imaginary, captivation by the mirror image, recognition in a fellow creature, and the symbolic, the purely formal order in differential features, one usually fails to notice how the specific dimension of the symbolic emerges from the very imaginary mirroring, namely, from its doubling, by means of which, as Lacan puts it succinctly, the real image is substituted by a virtual one. The imaginary and the symbolic are therefore not simply opposed as two external entities or levels within the imaginary itself. There is always a point of double reflection at which the imaginary is, so to speak, hooked on the symbolic. this is this right here. So in your weekly reflections for the For They Know Not What They Do course, something that is asked of the students is to choose a section to zoom in on, so to speak, and to focus your efforts. Here, I'll actually pull it up. So here's the syllabus, and as you see, weekly assignments. Let's skip to that part. It says, please do 2 of the following 4 things. Summarize this week's reading with key quotations to support your interpretation. Write about a passage you struggled with or found interesting, which you hope to get some clarification on, or see what others think of your interpretation or application. Ask a specific question about or offer encouragement on someone else's post. Choose a couple pages to summarize, and then ask critical questions about your summary. It looks like somebody actually some anonymous user too just jumped in here to look at it from their own side. Well, that's cool. I love this syllabus. It took me forever to actually get it together, but now that it's all here, everything's in one spot. So what I'm getting at, though, is that this section right here alone could be something you focus on. It might be something that I focus on, because it's like, what is he talking about with this imaginary doubling being necessary to symbolic? It's dank, right?
Yeah, right. Can I give a little commentary on that?
I want you to. And while you do so, I can still listen. I'm gonna go get some coffee and water.
So to understand the way the mirror stage works, and to look at it later, and Seminar 1, he has this experiment called the optical schema, which is you have a inverted bouquet, right? So you have the vase upside down and the flowers sticking up inside this box, and it's like it gets a plexiglass, I think, and it rotates. And so when it rotates in the right direction, it looks like it creates an optical illusion of an upright vase in front of a mirror. So you get a virtual image. What this represents is the imaginary image of the ego, but that's just the imaginary on its own. Then you put a plane mirror in between that, so then what you see is not only the virtual image of that bouquet, but also yourself seeing it. And so what he's trying to get at is that the imaginary alone doesn't suffice enough for maintaining the persistence and the existence of the ego on its own. That the ego itself is, as an image, since we're talking about the imaginary, is not just something of perception and fantasy, etc. What it is it's a mirror. So it has to reflect off of something. So in Seminar 2, he says we should see everything act as mirrors. Objects are mirrors. The ego is just the privileged object within the world, within the phenomenon. So as the ego is reflecting exterior, it also reflects back into itself. So that double reflection, double articulation is the point in which the ego makes a virtual status for itself to signify itself. Therefore, you have to signify it with language. Therefore, we have a symbolic order.
Okay. I'm not sure. I'm still not sure if I'm following, because I don't have this basis in the bouquet. Can you give Can you give an example of, like, I don't know, a child doing this, or if maybe like an adult doing this, or like, do you have something in mind that could give us?
Pretty much we shouldn't take this mirror stage thing literally. Pretty much what it is the fact that the ego, as an imaginary function, functions like a mirror. And what that does is it holds an image, but an image also reflects. So we can think of it as like being in a house of mirrors, right? You kind of get lost in which image is really yours, because it's constantly reflecting off of different mirrors, different images. So I reflect into you as you reflect in me, because you hold an image of me, of how I act, but I also take that into an account and reflect on how I view myself. But also, you'll say it right there in this chapter, in this page too. It's like, it's not that I see you and you see me, but I see you seeing me, and I take that into account.
Okay.
And what that does is create a virtual point in which you could signify it, right? That's where we get into this distinction between ideal ego, which is the only thing that is taken accounted for in the early mirror stage, the imago as he calls it, and then you have the ego ideal, which is what we identify symbolically within that virtual point that allows us to see the world in a specific framework because of that symbolic structuring of language, of the big other, of laws of prohibition and enjoyment. And so in between that, we do have the superego that kind of has this relation with the ego ideal, right? Our symbolic identity, right? It's not that I just have this image of myself as a body, but I am Andrew in the Navy, right? That's my ego ideal. I am Andrew in the Navy, but also I'm into studying theory, right? And the more I reflect on that and I try to pursue that, I hope that one day I'll get this jouissance that makes me feel this ideal ego, this wholeness, this whole image.
Right. And let's be honest, your ideal ego it's already kind of over the Navy, right? But also your experiences, your disillusionment, but also your sense of discipline and your bigger aspirations that overflow and go far beyond the Navy are all constitutively dependent on the experiences of having gotten duped to get into the Navy in the first place, right?
And we should think of this bouquet, right, back to inverted bouquet and stuff like that, because we don't actually see what's inside that box where the inverted vase is, but we should take that as that which escapes the symbolization in the imaginary process as like the unconscious. Like he says this in seminar 1 about like, oh, the id and drives and instincts and all this stuff.
Sick. Is there anything from the live chat that any of you want to add right now before I get back to reading this? Thank you, Andrew, for that. That was really great. I'm making a post here about the fact that we're live so people can hop in here. Something I want to say before I turn it over to anybody who's got anything they want to add from the chat or anything like that is just this. I'm really glad I chose to do this live today. Normally, I don't do these live. To get the back access to the Zoom call side of things so you can join by voice, to really be in that sort of student dynamic where it's like you're there in the monastery, so to speak, back in the medieval era where someone's reading and you're kind of there taking notes or whatever, like Nance. Andrew is obviously multitasking in a little bit more of an extreme way, which is awesome. But to get that access, you just become a $50 patron at Theory Underground. And if money's ever an obstacle, go to theory-underground.com/scholarship, and you can always apply for a scholarship to get access to things. But if that's an obstacle to you, but the main thing is we're hoping to get enough money that this project lasts longer than a year, because right now a lot of it's coming out of my pocket. So that's the advertisement for today. But I guess what I want to say is that I'm glad I did this live because I'm kind of blown away by the fact that 10 people have steadily been watching or listening. To get 10 people in a room for an exegetical reading is a feat. It's a feat. It's an accomplishment. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that there's even 10 people on the internet who are down to do this right now. So good job, you fucks. I'm going to reread this paragraph. The crucial theoretical point not to be missed here is that such mirror inversion cannot be reduced to the domain of the imaginary. That is to say, when one deals with the opposition of the imaginary and the symbolic, one usually fails to notice how the specific dimension of the symbolic emerges from the very imaginary mirroring, namely from the doubling, by means of which, as Lacan puts it succinctly, the real image is substituted by a virtual one. The imaginary and the symbolic are therefore not simply opposed as two external entities or levels, Within the imaginary itself, there is always a point of double reflection at which the imaginary is, so to speak, hooked on the symbolic. And I like how Andrew was talking about how, yeah, it's not in the development and formation of your sense of self and of your ideal ego. It's never just like, oh, what I want to look like, how I look. It's always how I look to the other and how I would like to be seen by the other. Hegel, and that would be the difference between ideal ego and ego ideal. Ideal ego is in the imaginary, ego ideal is in the symbolic. Ideal ego is how you want to be seen. No. Ideal ego is the opposite of that. Ideal ego is this, I want to be thought of as in the case of Andrew, I want to be thought of as the kind of person who, went through the Navy, a working class dude who went through the Navy, got into theory, has become a theory bro, but also is on track to become a clinician, right? Like that is an ideal image, right? But then also like how you speak and everything it participates in that ideal ego, right? But then the symbolic side of that, the ego ideal would be, but that's how you want to be seen you want to be seen that way by a specific kind of gaze, not just your own gaze, right? You've internalized this sort of sense for, Do you want to say something on that?
Right, exactly. No, exactly. And what I'm saying is pretty much like if you have language already built up in your symbolic network, then you take yourself into account with the words I or me. Like the ego becomes a symbol. But like with this whole phenomenon, this metaphor, this myth of the mirror stage, the other is already within you, like the mother's gaze, right, or the father's imperative law. So you are, when you speak and take yourself into account, like Lacan says, the language or speech isn't to relay meaning. It's a creative act that evokes an other. So the discourse of the other, the big other, that is unconscious, is where your desire is in the circuit. So that too, like you want to be seen by a specific big other or the big other, and it gets displaced by little others because we are in the world. Like let's take Dasein. We're in world. We're in referentiality with not only objects and tools, right, that are ready to hand, but also with other people. And Lacan would, agree to use Heideggerian terms because he has a big influence by Heidegger.
Sick.
Yeah.
Thank you. And in the chat, Secret Agent Dan said, I always have to think through the difference between ego ideal and ideal ego multiple times, and I still never get it right. The easy way to remember it is that ideal ego, because it's just a reversal of the order, but ideal ego, ideal and idea and imaginary, they all start with an I. Imaginary and ideal ego both start with an I, and they do go together. So ideal ego is in the imaginary, whereas ego ideal doesn't start with I. So that's the sort of trick for remembering it, is that just remember which one starts with an I. But as far as the actual difference, I say ideal ego is the posters on your wall as a teen, right? And then ego ideal is the gaze you're trying to impress. So, it could be like that really cool kid, you want that cool kid's recognition, or inversely, you're trying to offend your father or rebel against your father, which is a sort of, it's something you're trying to do. You're still trying to impress upon a certain gaze some kind of reaction and get a certain kind of recognition. So, but whatever it is, whether you're trying to impress somebody for positive reasons or you're trying to impress somebody for negative reasons, it's a symbolic thing, but it's like the ideal ego, the posters on your wall as a teen, you've got the rock star on the poster or you've got the rapper on the poster, and you go, I want to be like that. Like that person kind of represents like my ideal ego, right? But on the other side, it's like, but the gaze that you're trying to receive, who would that be? I love the example that Mikey uses in his post on The Game, the diss track that The Game put out against Eminem. and he does an analysis of that diss track. It's really genius if you're trying to think about the ego ideal and the ideal ego. And the point is that for the game, Eminem is actually his ideal ego, and the gaze that he wants recognition from is the gaze of Dr. Dre. Right. Hegel demonstrates the mechanism of this passage in the dialectic of the topsy-turvy world, Die Welt, which concludes the section on consciousness in his Phenomenology of Spirit. After exposing the Christian notion of the beyond as the inversion of the terrestrial life, here injustice and violence reign, while there goodness will be rewarded, etc., he points out how inversion is always double, how, on a closer look, it becomes manifest that the first world, whose inverted image is the topsy-turvy world, is already in itself inverted. Therein consists the rationale of caricature. Let us just recall Swift's procedure in Gulliver's Travels. The reader is confronted with a series of mocking inversions of our normal human universe. The island populated by dwarfs 2 inches tall, a country where normal relations between humans and horses are reversed, where humans live in stables and serve horses, where pizzas sit on humans and order. I'm going off of the Rick and Morty scene when they're running through the multiverse, and there's like pizza sitting on top of humans ordering. I forget what they're ordering, but you get the idea. Swift's true targets are, of course, our own weaknesses and stupidities. By means of a fantasy world which presents its inverted image, he endeavors to turn into ridicule the follies, the invertedness, of our own allegedly normal world. The image of humans who serve horses should arouse us to the vanity of the human species as compared with the simple dignity of horses. The null disputes of the Lilliputians are there to remind us of the conceit of human customs, and so on. Oh, yeah. Secret Agent Dan, it's pizza sitting on humans ordering furniture, right? Here we can clearly discern the function of the ego ideal, that is, the symbolic identification, from its imaginary counterpart. Symbolic identification is identification with the ideal virtual point from which the subject looks upon himself when his own actual life appears to him as a vain and repulsive spectacle, right? So if you're sitting there judging yourself, you're not. In a sort of sense, that's the point. There is this ego ideal at work, right? You're not judging yourself. You're seeing yourself from this symbolic standpoint, right? That is to say, Swift, like Monty Python, belongs to the misanthropic lineage of English humor based on an inversion to life as the substance of enjoyment. And the ego ideal is precisely the viewpoint assumed by the subject when he perceives his very normal everyday life as something inverted. This point is virtual, since it figures nowhere in reality. It differs from actual life as well as from its inverted caricature. That is to say, it cannot be located within the mirror relationship between reality and its inverted image. As such, it is of a strictly symbolic nature. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to play a little bit of something that will be recap for some of you, and it will be probably a very enjoyable recap. Whereas for others, this is a sort of freebie, something that you don't have access to unless you sign up for the course, the For They Know Not What They Do course. And that is the lecture. I'm going to go ahead and just pull up the lecture for you all. And let's play, because I'm going to go do a couple things. And I'm going to just play Mikey talking from Saturday night. This is the For They Know Not What They Do lecture. So for some of us, like I said, it's recap, but it's good. And for others, this is a little taste of what was going on. I'm going to use this as an opportunity, though, to teach you all about how to timestamp in a video, because these videos need to be timestamped over time, right? So let's pull it up, bottom of the screen. Okay, here we go. This is unlisted, as you see, already has 40 views. Usually my unlisted videos only get shared to a couple people or whatever, but this one was shared to everybody in the class, and so it's a banger. You know it's a banger because it already has 40 views and it's only been a couple days, and it's unlisted, which means it gets no organic clicks from within YouTube. This is all people coming to it and returning to it in the class itself. See if it'll load. Come on.
Old Marxist way, but then in recent times, it's more, we know very well what we're doing, but we're still doing it. So that's kind of what's packed inside of that early, or within that title. And it's worth just giving a quick little rundown of Slavoj's theory of ideology. Like I said, we've done this elsewhere, but this is just a quick little bullet point synopsis of it. So when he talks about the sublime object of ideology, right? What he's talking about is objet petit a, which is the object that causes desire, right? So the basic idea is that when we enter language, the young child experiences it as a great loss, that socialization, having to live by prohibitions, having to live by rules, they feel like they've given something up. They've lost a piece of themselves. Well, they didn't really lose a piece of themselves, right? But it's experienced as the loss of, for lack of a better word, and this is the word that Lacan would use, they feel like they've experienced a loss, or at least a fragmented loss of their being. Like some fragment of themselves was lost in this process. And that remainder, that excessive lost chunk of themselves, that is objet petit a. And so the reason this, and again, it's not a physical object. It's not a real concrete object. It doesn't have weight. You can't measure it, right? We would call it a virtual object. But the point is, our subjectivity is completely organized around this virtual object that we never really had to begin with, but is the process of language and prohibition coming into our lives and giving us, it affects us ontologically. Like, it actually makes us subjects lacking a virtual object that we never actually had. But our whole lives are structured around this impossible object. That's another way Lacanian and Žižekians talk about it, is to say it's an impossible object. Why? Because you can't get it. It's not something you ever had. It's not an actual object. But the point is, through our personal histories and the formations of our unconscious, we all are going to start to associate various traits or situations with this missing thing. So when we're walking around our everyday lives, most of the times the actual objects around us, they don't even register. They're just invisible. But sometimes you see a person, or you see a car, or you're driving through a neighborhood and you see a house, and that thing lights up to you. There's something sublime in that. There's something more. There's an excess that thing has that all the other objects around you don't have. Well, for a whole host of personal idiosyncratic reasons, that object has been positioned in this sublime empty spot of objet a, right? And we talk about it as an empty spot. We talk about it as an object, but that can also be confusing because it's not really an object. Again, it is a position within your experience of things. It's within your frame of experience. So Žižek will talk about, and Lacan, they'll talk about it as like looking awry, right? Like you're looking at the thing, but you're seeing it from a subjective perspective that you are totally unconscious of. You're totally unconscious of how your unconscious is shaping your very phenomenological experience of something. And that's what objet a really is about. And so for him, OJA, or the sublime object, is at the center of ideology. And the trick is that this sublime object can either be the thing like we esteem above all else, or it's the thing we hate that we're libidinally fixated on that has to be gotten rid of. So, I mean, his great example of this is the Jews in Nazi Germany, right? Hitler framed them as the sublime object. And in this particular case, the point is like, they're the sublime object in the sense of they have the concentrated jouissance that they have stolen from the German people, right? So they're the thieves of the German people's enjoyment. And so in this sense, it's a sublime object, but it's one that Žižek will talk about how the OJA can go from the glorious sublime object to excremental shit. And this is his example is Coca-Cola. If Coke is really ice cold and you're super thirsty, you drink it, it's delicious. But if it sits out long enough, it goes flat and it's the nastiest shit you've ever tasted. So he's talking about how this effect of how something is positioned in the sublime spot can go from dignity and integrity and transcendent kind of reality to shit, waste, garbage, trash, right? And it goes back and forth. And, I mean, think about, you've been in a relationship, you've been totally infatuated with the person, but as you got to know them, you start to see them more and more as a waste product of sorts, and that sublime effect they had on you totally disintegrates, and then you end up not being able to even stand being around them. And so this is what's going on with OJA, and this is totally going on in our personal lives. So if you go into analysis and you start talking to the analyst and free associating, they're going to start detecting what causes your desire, what's going on in your personal life. But what Žižek was able to do is to take this concept of Lacan, that Lacan says in Seminar 21, the non-duped heir, that the one thing he's invented is objet petit a. So Lacan claimed that concept as it's like saying Freud didn't have this worked out. This is the one thing I really developed and really kind of take intellectual ownership of. And so what Žižek does is he figures out how to take this concept that's always at play in our personal lives and our personal relationships, etc. And he sees how it's functioning in ideology and how it's functioning in politics. And that's hence the sublime object of ideology. So that's what he's bringing to the table as a critic of ideology, is he's taken OJA and all the other Lacanian concepts, but especially OJA, and seeing how it works in political situations. So somebody like Trump, right?
All right, and now I'm back. What's up, everybody? As you can see here, I have a bowl of Raisin Bran and bananas to eat. But what I said I was going to do is show you all how to do something. Let me show you how to do something. Oh, no, not that window. Let me show you this window. Okay, so watch. I said I would show you how to do timestamping. It is an essential part to being a participant in things, not just a passive consumer. Adam, in the live chat, has been doing a really good job of it. So what is timestamping? It means you're basically adding a note that helps people jump to a specific section of a video. So what we just listened to was a section of Mikey's lecture from Saturday night. It was a freebie for those of you who are not signed up for the actual course. Now, if I skip back, where does he actually start talking about the sublime object of ideology and saying what it is?
At the thing, but you're seeing it from a subjective loss of their being. Like some fragment of themselves was lost with Christ on the cross, that he's having these fantasies of getting the thing we don't have. And it is, human beings are, in a sense, derailed. Like what we're really after are the ways in which we're pursuing the fantasy. In this broad sense, there's sex in football, there's sex in rush hour traffic. There's sex in your anger toward your coworkers, but it's sex in this broader sense of the word. And sometimes I get like that word actually gets in the way
up with the
of
spot.
what we're actually talking about. But it's also helpful to also retroactively see what Freud was doing, because it really comes out.
So I'm watching the exact time right here, right? As I speed up to find the exact spot where it begins, I'm watching the time.
Freud's early work on the drives, and it's the mouth just enjoys talking. It's not about, it goes back to breastfeeding. I mean, this is psychoanalysis 101, but for a young child, they enjoy just the act of sucking the breast. It's not about and so the point is, human beings are in a sense derailed like object, but we're also going out of our way to mess it up and get in our own way, like we were talking about. Drive is the enjoyment of actually not getting the object. And so once you have the object, you end up pushing, the baby will push the rest away, and then whatever. And so it's this whole circuit that human beings do of, we pursue this thing that we think is going to give us perfect enjoyment, make us whole, right? But the real enjoyment is how we go about self-sabotaging that very pursuit. And this is not like animals trying to satisfy their biological imperatives. This is this derailment of us as biological beings through language. And it's through language that we start to realize language is what makes possible us really in a robust way being able to go, I don't have a thing. If I had the thing that's not here, it would be so great. And I mean, it goes back to this idea, this Hegelian idea of the murder. The word is the murder of the thing. And all that means is that language opens up absence into our world. And if we want to talk about, for example, Bruce Lee, all right, I just said a word, and yet somebody who is this historical figure is now present to us in a way, even though he still remains absent. So language, and this is really big for Lacan, this whole thing of how language can make something absent present, and yet it also can make something present absent. So for example, if I stand in front of a tree and I say tree, right? The weird thing is there's so much knowledge about trees packed inside of language that you can start talking about the tree, but in ways that it's not in its current state. So you can talk about its whole developmental process. It's, all of this stuff that's not immediately present to your empirical experience. And so this whole ability to that language has to explode the presence and absence of things. It forever mediates our relationship to things. And so this is what opens up this possibility of us having these fantasies of getting the thing we don't have. And it would be so amazing if we got it, but we actually are stimulated through not getting the thing. And that's what gets us wound up. And so, yeah, that's kind of what Dave said, but this is what we're getting at when we talk about sex, which is not obviously what the average person would say if you asked them to define the word sex. So, okay. So going back for a minute to cynical ideology. So for Slavoj, ideology is going to have the structure of an enlightened false consciousness. That's how he talks about it in Sublime Object. And this is the paradox of cynical ideology. This is what he also calls fetishistic disavow, or fetishist disavow. And it goes like this: I know very well, but nevertheless, right? What this does is, like, I have a conscious acknowledgement of a state of...
I'm just going to say at 28:30 is when he talks about fetishistic disavowal ideology and
affairs, and yet nevertheless I'm going to go about living as if I don't know about it, or I have knowledge about how things aren't, but I'm going to go about living as if they are that way. And this gets at the very split within us as beings, as split subjects, right? We're divided between consciousness and the unconscious. And so he's taken this thing that has to do with the clinical structure of perversion, and I don't want to get into that right now, but I'm just saying he takes something from the way that Lacanians think about perversion, and he's saying this is the structure of cynical ideology itself, this whole logic of I know very well, but nevertheless I'm still going to behave like I don't know very well. And so in that sense, like, there's alternate titles we could give to this book we're going to be studying. We could say, for they know very well what they do, or for they know very well what they do, but nevertheless, or even for they know very well what they do and they are doing it. So it just is, there's a lot packed in to the for they know not what they do title that he's developed in Sublime Object. And then, yes, you do have the thing with Christ on the cross that he's drawn from, but it's trying to highlight this fetishistic disavow, and our ability to sometimes we don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it, which is the old Marxist way. But then in recent times, it's more, we know very well what we're doing, but we're still doing it. So that's kind of what's packed inside of that early, or within that title. And it's worth just giving a quick little rundown of Slavoj's theory of ideology. Like I said, we've done this elsewhere, but this is
actually, so 30:40 is where he says it's worth giving a little rundown on Slavoj's theory of ideology. A short little rundown of Slavoj's theory of ideology, right? Good to have that, right? And what is the sublime object? How does this relate to objet A? Okay, and then I click comment, and then check out what happens. Timestamp. It's activated. It's now a hyperlink. What is a hyperlink? It means that you click on it, it does stuff. See? If I click on it, it takes me to that specific part of the video. So
early, or within that title. And it's worth just giving a quick little rundown of Slavoj's theory of ideology. Like I said, we've done this elsewhere, but this is just a quick little...
Okay, so now I just showed you all how to do timestamping. Somebody watching this stream in the future or right now, if you're able to access the comment section, could probably timestamp me explaining how to timestamp. And that would be useful. That's a useful thing that you can do, and it's active, not passive, right? Now, I don't want to give anybody a grief for passively viewing YouTube, for fuck's sakes, because that's the point is we're tired, we're exhausted, we're overwhelmed, and so then we watch YouTube. So there's nothing wrong with passively watching something when you're exhausted, when you're overwhelmed, when you don't know what to do with yourself. But one little way of being proactive and being a contributing community member, as far as Theory Underground is concerned, is timestamping and actually writing some text that describes why this would be useful to somebody else who might be like looking at this 4-hour video thinking, okay, what was the parts to this, right? And in my ideal vision of the future, not only would there be lots of you doing exegetical readings as these courses go on, or as you're taking this course in the future, doing your own exegetical readings, but also while you're doing your exegetical readings and while you're going through these lectures, you are being timestamped and you are timestamping others. And the reason is because this accelerates things and makes things, it makes things faster and easier for other people, right? It now becomes hyper real. Yeah, so now with that said, I'm going to take you all to Theory Underground /courses actually, you know what? No, fuck that. I was going to take you all to show you how to sign up to Theory Underground and how to create, put a profile picture. I'm looking at one of you in the chat who I know doesn't have your profile picture yet. Do set up a profile picture and how to get into the course. And while I play this for you all at 1.5 speed, I'm going to finish eating my bowl of Raisin Bran, and then we'll be back to read the next section, which is, according to this, let the emperor have his clothes. Okay, but for now, let's get back to it. None of your business. Welcome, everybody, to Theory Underground. I'm David McCarricker. I'm your host and guide today through the website. I'm going to show you how to set yourself up for success. So come along with me, and I'll show you what's up. So let's see over here. I'm just using Theory-Underground. There's a first very important thing that needs to be said is make sure that you type in https:// because if the S is missing, then the site is not secure, and it will log you out. And so that has been a bug that some people have already experienced. So make sure that it is secure. That's on you, apparently, according to the world of browsers. They say it's up to you to type that in. And then if you go to the website, it'll take a little bit because I'm not paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to speed up the process. There will be this pop-up. Click hell yeah if you want to get notifications for important updates. Otherwise, just say maybe next time. So what do you want? What do you want to know? What do you need to know? You go up to sign up. So I will use the email, the new symbolization@gmail.com. The password is none of your business. None of your business. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to delete this account as soon as I'm done anyway. Travis Barker, TravDog69. It's jokes. It's jokes. You can log in. You need to confirm your email address via the email we just sent you. All right. So the thing about the email that they just sent you, or that they sent me in this case, is that it probably went to the spam account. And sure enough, here I am looking at my spam folder on Google, and it's right here. It's in the spam. It's in the spam folder. That's where it's at. Some people don't actually get it where there's like in the spam folder at all, and then they have to go through the process of like telling the website to resend it, and then it works. So I don't know what to tell you. That's just how it works apparently. If it didn't come up there, you'll just have to do something like tell the website to resend it, which is apparently a problem some people run into. I'm sorry. It's one of the costs of doing things underground. Now, yes, let's go ahead and none of your business. 1, 2, 3. Remember me. Log in. A lot of people forget their passwords and have to reset it like 6 times. I get notifications every time people have to reset their stuff. One thing that's very important to me, you don't absolutely have to do it, but I just won't engage with you seriously if you don't do it, is put up a profile picture, preferably of you. So right here, you see your username, click it, click on it. Okay, watch what happens. Right here is like how Facebook has your page. This is where you can make a cover photo as well as upload an actual profile picture. See, select your file. In this case, I'm just gonna go ahead and upload something random. But then you can also upload your cover photo. And then once you've got that, you can crop it. And now, there you go. Now you've got a profile picture. Preferably use your own face. My God, please use your own face. This is not some Twitter thing. We're not out here in the public in the same way as Twitter or Tumblr. We're not trying to be anonymous. Okay, go to the timeline. Go to your timeline if you want. You know, you can always post on your timeline the good old same way that you would post hello. You can post on Facebook or something like that. You know, it's the same kind of thing, except that it's different because you only have connections here with people that you take courses with and read books with and stuff like that. But yeah, the same way that you can add friends on Facebook, you can actually add friends on here. So up here at the top where it says members, and then it'll take you here. You'll be able to see everybody. You see a lot of people don't have their profile pictures up. Please fix that. But yeah, add me as a connection. Add anybody that you're interested with connecting to. Add them. And then they'll be like your friends. They'll see your status updates. They'll be able to look at your profile picture. You can start a group chat with other people. So that's the social media aspect of things. Now that I'm in, go to courses. Okay, go to courses tab here at the top. See, Mikey teaches Jigs before they don't know what they do, $50. Click on that. Okay. As you can see, it says take this course right there. Click that. Add to cart. Proceed to checkout. Fill out the information. Put your money in there. Make it go. It'll work. And then once all that's set up, you'll get a confirmation. It should have a link to some things like the forum and the course itself. And you'll be automatically added into the forum and the course itself. Now you'll have access to the forum and the courses after you've got access. So this is courses. Click on Mikey's before they don't know what they do right here. Click start course right here. All right, so every week you do the reading and then you do a reflection ahead of the lecture. You can do your reflection by creating your own discussion posts or by, you just go to this reflection place here. You go down here to click to go to forum. You'll be able to listen to the weekly exegetical reading if I've done it. I have no promises that I will always do it, but if I did, then you'll be able to listen to that instead of doing the reading for yourself if you're too busy. And then, yeah, you'll be able to, if you don't want to create your own discussion post for reflections and questions on the week's chapter, then you can always just do a reply to the thread that I or someone else will inevitably have started on the topic of reflections and questions for the For They Know What They Do weekly reading. Remember, you have basically 2 weeks to do each chapter. If in an ideal world, you would read it and then reread it and take notes and then write a nice lengthy reflection with a lot of good questions for clarification so that Mikey has a lot of an idea of like how to lecture, like what you need from him. But we live in the real world, and so you won't always have time to do that, and that is okay. But yes, you can also just go to the forums tab at the top of the website and go to the For They Know What They Do course. You'll be able to see it once you've registered with the site, and once you've paid for the course, you'll be entered into it. You should be able to access everything then. And so, yeah, we're very excited to have everybody here. Thank you so much for taking this course, and do email me back with any questions that you might have. And we're looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. Take care. Bye-bye. Cool. All right. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Excuse me. I'm like just coming out of a bowl of cereal, and it was cereally delicious. It was actually really good. I've become a fan of Raisin Bran for the first time in my life. I never used to like it, but in the last 2 months, it's like all I eat for breakfast. Anyway, we're going to get back to the reading now. Can't timestamp in live chat, says Adam. I know, no, it's not possible. Though you are able to see the comment section, the eternal comment section on the left if you're doing it from the right browser. And I can't tell you, I think Google Chrome allows that if you're doing it from like a laptop, but yeah, if you're doing this from a phone, it ain't gonna be possible. Anyway, okay. What the hell? We have 12 people here. It was 6 like a second ago. The numbers just go up and down. People usually only stay for a few minutes, but I do want to encourage you all to think. The fact that you drop in on something where someone else is reading something, even if you do just stick around for 5 minutes, you've injected something more substantial into your life of the mind than you would have if you spent hours listening to people who ostensibly read books, right? it's more and more second hand, third hand, fourth hand, the further away you get from the texts themselves. And, that's not to say that that stuff's pointless, but it is to say that it's no substitute for the text and having that basis. So the next section, this would be a good spot to timestamp. The next section is let the emperor have his clothes. Another way of arriving at the same point is via the gesture of stating that the emperor has no clothes. The child from Andersen's tale, who with disarming innocence states the obvious, is usually taken as an exemplar of the word which delivers us from the stuffy hypocrisy and forces us to confront the actual state of things. What one prefers to pass over in silence are the catastrophic consequences of such a liberating gesture for its environs, for the intersubjective network within which it takes place. What one prefers to pass over in silence when talking about the child who can see that everyone's going along with the thing, and the kid's like, what, the emperor has no clothes though, right? Is what they prefer to pass over in silence are the catastrophic consequences of such a liberating gesture for its environs, which is to say what, like environment? For the intersubjective network within which it takes place. By stating openly that the emperor has no clothes, we intend only to get rid of the unnecessary hypocrisy and pretense. After the deed, when it is already too late, we suddenly notice that we got more than we bargained for, that the very community of which we were a member has disintegrated. This is why, perhaps, the time has come to abandon the usual praise of the child's gesture and rather conceive it as the prototype of the innocent chatterbox who, by blurting out what should remain unspoken, if the existing intersubjective network is to retain its consistency, unknowingly and involuntarily sets off the catastrophe. What is he saying? Is he saying that we should never point out hypocrisy? Is he saying that we should never point out the obvious? Is he saying that we should never point out? What is he saying? I mean, it makes me think that in part, we should, we know that there really is no big other. We know that the person who's putting themselves into that role or playing the function of the subject supposed to know doesn't really know everything, much less the solution to our own problems. But that by pointing it out and by focusing on that, by basically staying in the realm of deconstruction, we're not able to get anywhere. It actually disintegrates the ability to have any kind of a community that's doing anything at all, right? This is why the sort of pseudo-anarchistic, horizontalist, folk political, bunker mentality, affinity group kind of politics can never really get anywhere or do anything long term. It's because all you do is sit there and critique microaggressions and do a meta-analysis of the symbolic roles or functions that people are supposedly playing in that dynamic. And, it's kind of the opposite of being objective oriented and having goals, right? Ring Lardner's little masterpiece, Who Dealt? And I don't know that that's actually where he was going with that. That's kind of where my brain goes, and that's what I think, and it seems to work within a lot of the things that Slavoj says, but is that actually where he's going with this? Ring Lardner's little masterpiece, Who Dealt, tells the story of such a prattler. There is nothing special in its plot line as such. Two friendly couples, the narrator and her husband Tom, Helen and Arthur, spend an evening together playing bridge. The narrator, who is only recently married to Tom, knows nothing about his stormy past. Years ago, he and Helen were passionately in love. Because of a petty misunderstanding, they split up. Broken and helpless, Helen married their reliable friend Arthur, while Tom struggled to pull himself out of despair and took comfort in writing poems which, in a half-concealed way, tells the story of his lost love. The narrator has found Tom's literary efforts among his papers. Unaware of their impact, she recites them during the game to amuse the company. The story ends at the precise moment when the catastrophe comes to light, when the narrator becomes aware of saying something terribly wrong. Yikes. I want to read that, actually. That makes me want to read it. But yeah, this is an example of a chatterbox, a prattler, not having that sort of critical distance, not having any real sense of they're functioning within the context, but they're not taking the environment into account, right? So far, nothing special. The effect of the story hinges exclusively on its narrative perspective. It is written entirely as the narrator's monologue, as her confused prattle accompanying the game. We are strictly limited to her perspective, to what she says and sees. It would be easy to imagine the same story retold from another perspective, that of her husband Tom, for example, who trembles with anxiety as he observes his prattling wife approaching the dangerous ground. Lardner wisely preferred the viewpoint of the person who unknowingly acted as the cause of catastrophe. Instead of presenting the catastrophe immediately, he evokes it off-champ, to use this term from cinema theory. That is, as it is mirrored in the face of its cause. Okay, what? Does anybody in here know about that? What off-champ in media theory or cinema theory has to do with? Therein consists his narrative mastery. Although strictly limited to the viewpoint of the innocent chatterbox, we, the readers, simultaneously occupy the position of the Hitchcockian man who knows too much, who knows that the prattler's words inscribe themselves in a framework within which they mean catastrophe. Our horror is strictly codependent on the radical limitation of our perspective to that of the ignorant prattler who, until the very end, has no presentiment of the effect of her words. This is what Lacan means when he ascertains that the subject of the signifier is constitutively split. The speaking subject is split into the ignorance of her imaginary experience. The narrator imagines that she is pursuing the usual light table conversation, and the weight her words assume within the field of the big other, the way they affect the intersubjective network, right? So she's this split, yeah, here she is. It's just all part of this imaginary setting that's kind of decontextualized. It's just she's participating in idle chatter, as Heidegger would call it. It's just the hanging out, chitter-chatting. But the other side of the split is the weight her words assume within the field of the big other, the way they affect the intersubjective network. The truth of innocent prattle can well be intersubjective catastrophe. Lacan's point is simply that these two levels never fully cohere. The gap separating them is constitutive. The subject, by definition, cannot master the effects of his speech, since the big other is in charge, right? So the point is you might think that you're having a casual conversation, but because you are not God, because you do not have an ultimate perspective on the situation, the context, the environs, as he said, the intersubjective symbolic network is always not fully within your comprehension, meaning that you can't really know the weight your words might have in some cases, right? In this day and age, people are aware of that, which is why they're so scared to speak up online. People are aware that other people are going to read a whole bunch of symbolic contextualization meaning into anything that you say, and so people get all scared. People know that in the audience of anybody's channel, there are little conspiracy theorists looking to stitch together a narrative about you, and so people prefer to stay quiet, right? This is the self-censorship phenomenon that happens in a culture of fear and silencing, right? It's usually not done by other people to you so much as you are aware that there is this split between what you want to say and the ways that it can be perceived or interpreted, or the ways that it might have an unbeknownst weight within the existing symbolic frame. This limitation to the viewpoint of the narrator as cause of the catastrophe implies again the structure of double mirroring. Our view is not confined to the way her words are mirrored in the eyes of those affected by them, but even more radically to the way the effect of her words upon her environs. The mirroring of her words in her environs is mirrored back in herself. Here again, this double reflection produces a symbolic point, the nature of which is purely virtual. Neither what I immediately see, reality itself, nor the way others see me, the real, inverted image of reality, the way I see the others seeing me, nor the way others see me, but instead the way I see the others seeing me, right? If we do not add this third, purely virtual viewpoint of the ego ideal, then it remains totally incomprehensible how the inverted representation of our normal world can act as an ironic refusal of the invertedness that pertains to our normal world itself. That is, how the depiction of a strange world opposed to ours can give rise to the radical estrangement from our own. The key to the efficacy of Lardner's story is that by means of such a double mirroring, we, its readers, are set up in the position of the narrator's ego ideal. We are capable of locating her self-infatuated prattle in its intersubjective context and thus taking notice of its catastrophic effects. In Hegelese, we, the readers, are her in itself or for us. Right, the point being is you're not reading this story from the perspective of a third party or some objective viewpoint. You get to experience it from her viewpoint, but in doing so, you realize there's no such thing as her viewpoint alone. Her viewpoint is infused with or constitutive with seeing herself from the perspective of others. This is also the point at which all attempts to define the invertedness of the modern world reach an impasse. The double inversion calls into question the very standard of normality which they make use of to measure the invertedness. What we have in mind here are formulations based upon the instead of logic, like those which abound in the works of young Marx. Quote, instead of recognizing in the product of my work the actualization of my essential forces, this product appears to me as an independent power oppressing me. That would probably be from the 1844 manuscripts. Let us recall the famous research on authoritarian personality from the late 40s, where Adorno and his collaborators endeavored to define the authoritarian syndrome, the Weberian ideal type of the authoritarian psychic disposition. How did they construct their initial hypothesis, the coherent series of features which constitute the authoritarian type? Martin J. I want to read more Martin J. Martin J., in his dialectical imagination, makes a sarcastic remark on how they arrived at the authoritarian syndrome by simply inverting the features that define the ideological image of the liberal bourgeois individual. The ambiguity consists in the non-explicated status of this positive counterpart to the authoritarian personality. Is it effectively its positive counterpart for the realization of which we should strive, or is the authoritarian personality the reverse of the liberal personality, in the sense of its inherent dark side? In the first case, liberal personality is conceived as a kind of essential possibility, the realization of which turned into its opposite because the fascist regression. Their relationship is therefore that of the ideal paradigm, liberal personality, and its perverted realization, authoritarian personality. As such, it could easily be described by means of the young Marxian rhetorics. Instead of, in quotes, this is a big parenthetical, so in quotes, instead of tolerating difference and accepting nonviolent dialogue as the only means to arrive at a common decision, the subject advocates violent intolerance and distrust in free dialogue. Instead of critically examining every authority, the subject uncritically obeys those in power, etc. In the second case, the authoritarian personality has a strict symptomatic value. In it, the repressed truth of the liberal, open personality emerges. That is, the liberal personality is confronted with its totalitarian foundation. The same ambiguity pertains to Marx's formulation of the topsy-turvy world of commodity fetishism as the inversion of the normal, transparent relations between individuals. As, for example, when he compares the inversion proper to commodity fetishism with the idealist inversion of the relationship between the universal and the particular. Quote, if I say Roman law and German law are both laws, it is something which stands by itself. But if, on the contrary, I say the law, this abstract thing realizes itself in Roman law and in German law, as in these concrete laws, the interconnection becomes mystical, right? This is the idea, the Platonic idea, the idealist idea, that the law is this abstract thing that exists outside of history, but realizes itself in particular forms like Roman law and German law. How do common sense nominalism, Roman law and German law as two laws, and speculative idealism, the law realizes itself in Roman law and in German law, relate? And nominalism is basically just the idea that ideas, these abstract ideas that are only instantiated in specific particular examples or historical moments, nominalism is the idea that we should get rid of the idea itself and just look at the particular instances, right? If we're going to use generalities or come up with some general laws or we're going to try to form some sense of a universal, we only have the actual concrete particular instantiations to look at, and we should not be making some appeal to some abstract transcendental or metaphysical, entity like this Platonic form that exists outside of the concrete instantiations. Okay, so how is common sense, what I just described, which is what he's calling common sense nominalism, to be related to speculative idealism, which would be like, saying that the law itself is this outside entity, this transcendent ideal? Is the latter a simple inversion of the first, and as such the theoretical expression of the invertedness, alienation, of the actual social life itself? Or is the topsy-turvy world of dialectical speculation the hidden truth of our very normal, everyday, commonsensical universe? What is at stake here is the very notion of alienation in Marx. The moment invertedness is redoubled, the moment the inversion attests to the invertedness of the normal state itself, the very standard by means of which we measure alienation is called into question. We could further posit that with Lacan, the status of the subject itself, the subject of the signifier, is that of just such a virtual image. It exists only as a virtual point in the self-relating of the signifier's dyads. What? What's that, Slavoj? We could further posit that with Lacan, the status of the subject itself is that of such a virtual image, is that of just such a virtual image. It exists only as a virtual point in the self-relating of the signifier's dyads. What do you all think he's saying here? But what is this? Adam says, I think an incredibly worthy project would be a Žižekian glossary. Do you mean like a dictionary of sorts? There might be one, but we could also start one on the forum. As something that will have been, that is never present in reality or its real, actual image. That's the other half of the part that I was saying. What are you saying? Maybe I should have finished reading it before I started making it, but I just don't. He lost me on the first half. So I'm going to read it again in its entirety, and then I'll finish the paragraph and we'll come back to it if it doesn't get made sense of in the paragraph. We could further posit that with Lacan, the status of the subject itself, the subject of the signifier, is that of just such a virtual image. It exists only as a virtual point in the self-relating of a signifier's dyads, as something that will have been, that is never present in reality or its real actual image. It is always already past, although it never appeared in the past itself. It is constituted by means of a double reflection, as a result of the way the past's mirroring in the future is mirrored back in the present. We all remember from our youth the sublime dialectical materialist formulas of the subjective mirroring reflection of the objective reality. All we have to do to arrive at the Lacanian notion of the subject is to redouble the reflection. The subject designates that virtual point in which reflection itself is reflected back into reality. In which, for example, this is a new kind of striptease, by the way, is taking off your clothes while reading, you know? This is, they don't have clubs like this that I know of, but this is what would be required to get me to show up for a strip club, is the stripper would have to be reading while doing it. But excuse me while I take off my hoodie here. It's way too hot. It starts out really cold here in Mexico and then it gets hot. Okay. Theory only fans, says Nance. The subject designates that virtual point in which reflection itself is reflected back into reality, in which, for example, my perception of the possible future outcome of my present acts determines what I will do now. What we call subjectivity is at its most elementary the self-referential short circuit, which ultimately invalidates every prognosis in intersubjective relations. The prognosis itself, as soon as it is uttered, bears upon the predicted outcome, and it is never able to take into account this effect of its own act of enunciation. And the same goes for Hegelian reflection. Far from being reducible to the imaginary mirror relationship between the subject and its other, it is always redoubled in the above described way. It implies a non-imaginary virtual point. Yeah, so, but how does this tie into what he's trying to say about this distinction between the common sense nominalism and the speculative idealism? That one is an inversion of the other, and then he says we have to re-invert, do another inversion to really get at what's going on. Yeah, is he just saying what you're saying there, Adam? We understand ourselves by virtue of our perspective of others kind of thing? I will highlight this as another section that I might want to unpack this week in a forum post. But for the time being, I also want to encourage people to not get too bogged down when you're doing this kind of a reading and trying to understand every aspect of it, because it's more important that you get the fire hose effect of being overwhelmed, because if you tarry with this text long enough to feel overwhelmed, then that's where Mikey's lecture will be most useful, because it will bring clarity. So he'll undoubtedly talk about this short circuit effect, this double inversion, and will make it all click into place within the larger context of the text and Slavoj's life work, right? Nance says, giving ontic primacy to one's own solipsistic preferences and positions, like the Platonic lamp is your personal lamp ideal. Ontic primacy to one's own solipsistic preferences and positions. I don't know what you mean. The basic lesson of the double reflection is therefore that the symbolic truth emerges via the imitation of imitation. This is what Plato found unbearable in the illusion of painting. This is why he wanted to expel painters from his ideal state. The picture does not compete with appearance. It competes with what Plato designates for us beyond appearance as being the idea. Here one has only to recall the resort to theater within theater in order to stage a concealed truth. This is how the king murderer is unmasked in Hamlet, for example, or the resort to painting within painting in order to indicate the dimension excluded from the painting. And is not the lesson of Hitchcock's Vertigo precisely the same? The hour of truth arrives for Scotty, the film's hero, when he discovers that the copy he was trying to recreate actually is the girl whom he knew as Madeline, and that he was therefore busy at making a copy of a copy. The copy he was trying to recreate, he says, as in Judy, whom he was trying to remodel into a perfect copy of Madeline, his lost great love. Turns out that she really is Madeline. Is that? I see. I don't know the Hitchcock reference, but okay. Gavin Elster, the film's evil spirit, has already used Judy as a substitute for his wife, and remodeled her after the true Madeline. In other words, Scotty's fury at the end is an authentic platonic fury. He is furious at discovering that he was imitating the imitation. Nance had said in clarification on that last comment, we can't think outside our own thoughts. We always understand ourselves from some virtual standpoint that is not entirely our own, right? Our desire is desire of the other. We see ourselves through some virtual standpoint of some imaginary symbolic other. And so, yeah, I think that this is all, he's trying to make this more concrete with an example, and the example is losing me because I'm not as familiar with it. But this section here is one that I would like to see more on in the future for sure. But for the time being, we've reached a section end. What are we going to do now? Well, I have a big day of things to go do, and I will be off to go do those in a minute. But I wanted to spend a moment before closing out to say a couple things just about reading, and that is, you don't have to read the entirety of the text. Just get 5 minutes of it, 10 minutes of it, give the textual life a foothold in your day. And then maybe you'll go over the bounds of the small little foothold that you'd given it, right? If you give yourself 5 minutes to do a reading, but then you end up doing 10 minutes, well, then you've doubled the amount of time that you were going to give to a reading. So good job. And if you dropped in on this chat just to watch 5 minutes of this stream, but you ended up getting a half hour out of it, congratulations. And here I am. I started this stream with only the intention of reading the first section. I read 2 sections, right? It's good to have a low threshold or a bare minimum on the one side for those days when you're like, oh, I don't really know if I should do that. And then to have, when you're really feeling motivated, a much higher ideal. And so you can maintain 2 competing goals. One is the bare minimum goal, and the other is, oh, I'm going to read this whole chapter, and then I'm going to come back to it a few days later, and I'm going to reread it and take notes. You know, like that kind of extreme cannot always be maintained because the time and energy are not always there. But, you know, here's what we have. This is what we get for today. And Purple Flesh says he's talking about the Hitchcock film Vertigo. Well, I mean, I know that. He said it himself. I just haven't seen Vertigo, and so I don't know about this Scotty making a copy. I guess he was trying to recreate the one he lost, but then the recreation was the one he lost. So yeah, it's just over my head is all, because I just don't know what he's talking about. But yeah, Žižek covers his Vertigo take in Pervert's Guide to Cinema. Yeah, I need to watch that. Okay, folks, I'm about to close out. This has been a great time. I love it. I hope to do another one of these sometime this week. The one I do tomorrow is going to be probably in preparation for my lecture on Wednesday night. I'll be doing a lecture with Elton Alkay of Working Class Intelligentsia. That's because we pushed off the lectures by a week because he was sick. But I'll be giving a lecture on identitarian PMCs, which is to say, feminist, how every time an oppressed group gets some institutional representation, what that means is that it creates jobs for a handful of college-educated elites who are supposed to be representatives of that group. And then in the era of the internet, obviously there's also a special little place for freelance representatives of those groups. But there's an inherent contradiction between being the representative of an oppressed minority and being a working class person that is supposedly represented by that category or by those representatives who are supposed to be representing that category. And that fundamental antagonism is that even if you're from the working class, insofar as you are standing in that position of the representative, you are kind of like in that position of priest. You are in that position of righteous one. You are in that position of being the subject supposed to have the authentic voice and perspective and interests of the respective group in question. And I mean, that's already complicated. But the more important point is that once you are in that position, there is prestige and recognition, as well as usually some kind of salary to be gained from maintaining that role. Okay? And the question is, obviously, as a subclass or class within the reproduction of capitalist society, the PMC has different, an antagonistic relationship to the capitalist class that the workers do as well, but then also has an antagonistic relationship to the workers because the overthrow of that regime of labor exploitation is not in the direct immediate interests of people who are getting a lot of recognition, who are getting a lot of prestige, who are getting honor and glory from holding that role. Okay, so if grand transformation of society that utilizes automation to abolish the most backbreaking, soul-crushing, undignifying, brutal kinds of labor is possible, the question is where could that change come from, except for from people in the political class, people in the representative class, people in the technocratic class, right? You would think that the changes have to come from there, but at the same time, there is a vested interest in maintaining one's bullshit job at the expense of keeping most people working down there at the bottom doing shitty jobs. Okay, so there is an inherent contradiction or class antagonism between those who represent the oppressed and the oppressed themselves, who are fucking sick and tired of being told that they're represented, sick and tired of being told, oh yeah, my interests are being represented, at the same time that we're working longer hours for shorter pay, and we see automation is not freeing up time and energy, much less resources for people. And so that will be what I'll be lecturing about. What will I be reading about tomorrow? Stay tuned. And then either today or tomorrow, I will probably release a reading that goes in that vein. All right, in that direction. But anyway, much love, folks. I'm going to play an advertisement on the way out for the exegetical reading sessions in the morning. If you want to join on the Zoom side, if you want to join these conversations like Nance and Andrew were doing, then this is about how to get involved on that side of things. But until then, or until I see you tomorrow or in the near future, take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome. What you saw here was a bunch of clips of excerpts from a couple of reading sessions that were done as a part of the Essential Texts live exegetical readings with Dave. Those are not live on YouTube, but they are done live on Zoom. And if you want to be able to participate, we'd love to have you. This is a quick little infomercial about what's being offered. Do you want to read, but you find that you're too distracted? Is that why you find yourself listening to things like this? Do you wish that you could focus in the mornings and have a more structured reading regimen so that you would be able to develop yourself to have a basis in a variety of fields, from political and social theory to continental philosophy and theory more broadly? Perhaps you find that while trying to do that, what's actually happening is you're constantly getting distracted or getting neurotically caught up in questioning whether you're even reading it correctly or not. And yeah, maybe you could benefit from having morning sessions with me. Every one of the courses being offered from Theory Underground is going to have an accompanied live exegetical reading component that you could attend in the mornings through Zoom calls. If you're someone who either has a lot of time on their hands and is playing video games, working out, skateboarding, or perhaps doing some kind of wage labor that allows you to listen to things, this is an opportunity to basically read these texts, but with a guide. Someone who's already been over the territory before. This can drastically accelerate your own development, but also your own reading habits. Essential Texts with Dave in the Morning is something that I've been planning and developing for a while now, but I've only been doing it for a few weeks, and it's been a really good time. It's one of those things where I stop and have a side conversation to make sure that we've been making sense of the text up until that point, and then I'll summarize where we're at and then keep going. And that kind of interaction with other people while reading a text aloud takes it out of the isolation and sort of